Amen.
Yes, there was one more thing I forgot to, everybody saw.
In Luke chapter 6, we're going to finish up 6 pretty quickly and get into 7. We've looked at last week at Luke's version of the Sermon on the Mount, most of it. We looked at the blessings of the kingdom. We looked at how Jesus encourages us to love our enemies, and in doing that, we're never more like God. When we're loving those who are ungrateful and wicked, because that's what God does. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful, which extends then into his comments about judging and not judging, and forgiving, and what would have been a pretty humorous reference to the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and the plank in your own. Then we get into verse 43, which is a little short parable. And if you're a gardener, then you can relate to this pretty much. If you've ever had experience with trees, vines, whatever, bearing fruit. Jesus says in Luke 6:43, no good tree bears bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit. Each tree is recognized by its own fruit. People don't pick figs from thorn bushes or grapes from briars, which I think everybody would agree with, right? You wouldn't be surprised to find grapes on a grapevine, but would be awfully stunned to find figs there and wouldn't even expect it. Then Jesus makes the point in verse 45, makes the application. A good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. What's he really saying there? What's his point? What's he getting at with this parable? And this is important because it actually touches on a lot of what he's going to say after this. What really is his main thrust here?
He's kind of getting at our heart, right? Out of the heart come good things and bad things.
Right. I guess let me be specific here. I think one of the things you could assume that Jesus is saying here, and I think wrongly, is that there are just people who are bad and they're always going to be bad, and there are just people who are good and they're always going to be good. Sort of like the grapes, and a grapevine is always a grapevine, right? There's no hope that a grapevine is ever going to be anything else. So you could take this as Jesus saying, bad people are just going to be bad people, and that's all there is to it. But I think it's kind of almost the opposite of that. I think what he's getting at is that the things that we say, we can easily sort of excuse ourselves, right? Well, I was careless in what I said, or this is something we do a lot, in our culture, that when you throw something out on social media, and then somebody famous throws something out on social media and then has to retract it. Well, I didn't mean it that way, or I misspoke. But one of the things Jesus is getting at, I think, is it doesn't really work that way. What comes out of you is what's down in there, right? So the things that you say are reflective of the things that are in your heart. And so it's not a way of saying you're hopelessly evil. It's a way of saying, let the things that you say be consistent with, with what you want to be, with this person, this teaching that I'm trying to get you to follow. He goes on in verse 46, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? You see what he's getting at? There are people who would, what does he mean by that? You call me Lord, Lord. I mean, shouldn't we call Jesus Lord?
Well, the assumption is if you call someone your Lord, it means that you are subservient, might not be the right word, but you owe them your loyalty, your allegiance, and your obedience.
Okay.
And at that time, that would have been like the landowner and the people who worked on the land. That would have been the relationship. They would have to obey. They would get, whatever kind of payment or what it's from the landowner, but they would owe him their obedience. And if they didn't obey, there would be a problem.
Yeah, obedience, right? Why do you call me Lord, Lord, but you don't do what I say? It's easy to call Jesus Lord, right? It's easy to call him Lord, but what we're looking for is the obedience from the heart, the good man bringing good things out of his heart, and not the sort of just, speaking the right words, saying the right things, dotting your I's and crossing your T's, while you go on about your business however you like. He's
Patrick.
wanting obedience. He's wanting people to obey, to do what he asks them to do.
Or
Patrick?
is he actually, is this the word here for Lord? Is that the word for God?
It's no, it's the word that we translate Lord has a wide range of meanings. It sometimes refers to God, but it also can just refer, it gives be an honorific, almost like sir,
Okay.
in Jesus'
So
culture.
so
it
it
can,
has the God mean, but it also can be used for.
yes, for
another
people,
person.
yes.
So
Especially,
say,
yeah.
say, you call me Lord, and, oh, okay, you're looking at me as God, and you're supposed to obey God, but that's not what he's saying.
I mean, in Jesus' time, a student might call a teacher Lord, sir. It's a way of sort of honoring them and sort of delineating there's an unequal relationship there, and so it's a way of sort of acknowledging. It can also refer to God.
Sheriff called Abraham Lord.
Yes.
That's what he thinks.
Yes. It can also.
Some women don't like to hear that. But been there. Especially women liberty.
So it's a way of sort of, he's sort of saying you acknowledge that I'm the teacher, and yet you don't do what I say. Christy, I think you had a comment.
Well, I have a little bit of a different, not contrary, but a little bit of a different read on the fruit part. Not contrary to what you're saying, but I kind of looked at it, I kind of see it from a different angle, maybe. I look at it and say, and I hear this as, if there's good fruit, there's a good person behind it. It brings a little bit of a different picture to who's doing God's work to me, because it really makes me pause a minute when I say, well, I know an awful lot of people who have good fruit. They're what they do results in good fruit, who never come to church, don't profess to be Christians. And it makes me stop and think about what that might, not my call to say, but might mean to God. And I think that might be in there, not contrary to what you said, but people.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I didn't hear. Yeah, I don't think you're wrong about that. I think that it works that way too. That what comes out of what Jesus says, what comes out of you is what is in you, right? And I think all of us recognize, hey, we can all say the right things at the right times to pull the wool over people's eyes, but that with time and with, continued interaction, what is in a person comes out, right? Especially in moments of stress and anger and fear, and what is in us comes out of us. And then I think as he gets into this stuff about calling him Lord, it kind of works both ways, right? You call me Lord, you say the right things, but I don't see the fruit. I don't see you bearing out your allegiance to me by doing things that I want you to do. As for everyone who comes to me and hears my words and put them into practice, I'll show you what they're like. They're like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid a foundation on rock. When a flood came, the torrent struck that house, but could not shake it because it was well built. But the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. The moment the torrent struck that house, it collapsed and its destruction was complete. So it's this picture, right? And it's the way he sort of rams the sermon home with do what I tell you. Don't just say the words. Don't just claim allegiance to me by calling me the right thing. Do what I ask. And if you do, he says, that you're like a person who's built this house on a solid foundation, and whatever hits and whatever comes won't be able to shake. You'll be firm. You'll be set firmly in bedrock. You will have this foundation of my teaching on which you can build a life, build a house. Maybe there's some sort of eschatological last days kind of thing in mind here. Some people have heard in that echoes of the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, the destruction of the temple, the house of God being destroyed. But certainly, whatever it is, Jesus is making the claim that doing what he says, that obeying him it's not just about pleasing him, it's also about building this house that will stand.
There is some context, though, that I think is needed, and maybe this ties into Christy's point, because I think it would be really easy to take this snippet that Jesus said, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do what I tell you?" And take that to mean that you're violating this passage when you don't do what other Christians tell you to do. And if in context we look at what Jesus has just been telling them to do, it wasn't that you have to attend church every Sunday, that you have to, do this little thing. What he's been talking about is loving one another and not judging one another, right? And he's been talking about sort of the big ticket items there. And surely that's what he's trying to get at here in context. He's talking about those big things that he's just been talking about in this thing, not, what churches have often split over, kitchens in the, you see what I'm saying here. So I don't think Jesus is moving into, I'm now adopting a legalism approach here, that you've got to go down the checklist, because that's not what he's been talking about in his message to these people.
Yeah, and that's right. And that said, though, I do think we can sometimes think of Jesus as this guy who was all about just this sort of, it was all about, you're fine like you are. Jesus had expectations. I mean, I think we'd all agree with that. Jesus had expectations of his followers. They weren't always the expectations that the other religious people had. Often they ran directly counter to those. And as you say, Ron, I think Jesus's primary concerns seem to always be about love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. We looked at the ways his interpretations of Scripture always elevated people and always tried to care for people in need, and always looked for those opportunities. But very definite expectations. He has expectations, and he expects and wants us to be obedient to him. Now, I think as Christians, as fellow followers of his, we've got to be careful about assuming that what we think he's talking about is the important thing. But I want to. I don't want to miss that he does say, "Do what I tell you to do. Live the way I tell you to live." And those expectations are there, which I know you weren't denying.
No,
Later he will be going in, in Luke's gospel, he will mention the cost of discipleship.
Yeah.
And the parables, i.e., count the cost, what is required of you to be a disciple of Christ. That not just the lip service, not just easy living, but the costs.
Right.
And in emphasizing what I was emphasizing, I don't think I'm letting anybody off, because those things are actually the harder things to strive for.
They really are.
I mean, to love the people who you really don't like or who irritate you, or actually, to love your enemies, right? To have that view of, I'm not judging other people. Compared to that, checking off the boxes of like coming to church and some of these other things, if that was all that was required, that might have been easier. Of course, once you start ratcheting all the demands up, we see that that's a trap in itself too. But I don't think this lets people off. To the contrary, I think if you're focusing on that, and that's, I think, what he's focusing on, because that's more like what the Pharisees were doing, right? They had the minutia taken care of most of the time, but they weren't focusing on the picture behind it in this instance. But I agree with you. Yeah, certainly Jesus does have expectations.
And I think it's natural. I mean, you mentioned a couple of times going to church, assembly. I think it's natural for followers of Jesus to want to be with other followers of Jesus. I think that's something that we want. And again, I know you're not arguing against that. Actually,
when you gave your sermon on Thomas and pointed out he hadn't been at the assembly, I half thought during the sermon that you could have just detoured and said, so the lesson here is you better attend church.
You never know what you're going to miss.
Something. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, right. You never know what you're going to miss, right? All these things, but you're right. I mean, the big, you call the big ticket items, I think is what you said. The central items, the commands on which all the other ones hang. Doesn't deny that those other commands were there, right? But they all centered around and revolved around these big commands. That's what Jesus is getting at in this sermon. So yeah, good points. Let's roll on into chapter 7 here, unless we have other thoughts. Oh, I just would say I really like. I've always really liked that idea of building your house on Jesus's commands, Jesus's teaching. I don't know. I struggle sometimes with how to articulate what that means, but that's one of the functions of parables. I think they sort of capture truths that you can't really articulate in other ways. So, I welcome anybody's thoughts on what it means to build your house on Jesus's teaching. I think I get it, and I think you get it too. But I'm, if you have thoughts on that, I'd be happy to hear them. I keep
You're
hearing.
not talking about a literal house, you're talking about a household. Right? I'm sure you've done that, we've done that, other people in this room have done that too. We build our house with Jesus at the center, and when you raise your children, basically, you're a Christ-centered home.
Okay.
Basically, I think, what
And for people who don't have families, what is building your house on
it's a
Jesus?
little narrower, but it's just a smaller house, I guess.
It's building your life.
Building your life, yeah. I mean, that's one way to say it. I think building your life.
But again, I suggest, people who build their life on just doctrine and never actually develop that relationship with Jesus and the love and I think they may still be on the sand, right? It's maybe not a coincidence that he said sometimes you have to dig deep, right?
He actually uses two words. I just noticed at this time, he uses two words. It's like he digs deep, or he deeply digs deeply. I mean, there's he really emphasizes the digging down. There's seems like there's effort and intentionality involved in this. This is something that you don't just figure out one day and you're done. It's something that you continually are about, I think.
The charge to the church in Ephesus in the book of Revelation is that, yeah, you guys are great. You can discern, who false apostles are. Okay, you're really great with the knowledge, but you forgot your first love.
Mhm.
So I'm adding on to what Ron has to say. So
Yeah.
echoing on
Good.
that.
Yeah, good comment.
Yeah, but I think the foundation of this rock is even when Jesus was saying, calling me Lord, Lord, but you are not obeying me, that means whoever, we have every Christianity face. If I say Christianity face, there's a difference between Christianity face and then Christianity heart. Somebody who is a Christianity heart, you will not even recognize him. The one true who is obeying what Jesus Christ was saying. And we have a Christianity face, when everything that he does by faith, you think that this man belongs to Christ, the way his face acts or this kind of thing. But the true heart is, as Jesus was saying in John 14:15, and he said, if you love me, 15:14, if you love me, then you will keep my command. That means everything that I said, if you love me and you want to call me Lord, Lord, you want to call me Master, Master, you want to call me teacher, that means you are trying to obey everything that I lay down for you to follow.
Good. Yeah. Thank you. So I think if we get to chapter 7, you'll get some Michael made a comment. Mike made a comment about how in Florida you can build your house on a sinkhole if you're not careful, and Jesus' time, there's sand, there's places in the Holy Land where, like in most places, where you wouldn't want to build, and certainly you don't want to build just on the ground. You got to dig down to set your footings and to have something that's going to hold the house, and that's
Yeah.
what.
I think about build your house wisely. And Ron said it's our lives, right? And when you think about our homes, they're private places. So I think about how I live privately. Am I building my life on Jesus? And then when I'm in public, if it is, it would be revealed. It's not this two-faced thing. And I like the point when he says that then when the torrents and the waves come, it knocks you off your course. And it's kind of like when we're out about from our home, not maybe building our lives on Jesus, it will be revealed because we're going to come face to face with challenges. So I think this whole thing is about building our lives and that Jesus the standard, and who I am privately. The work is to be who I am privately and following Jesus. So there's no, I always say I have my gloves on fighting Satan. So when I'm out, I don't have to say, string me up. I'm already in the battle, so to speak, because I've been doing it in my private life. So in my public life, I don't have to pretend or try to get ready or try to fake it out, because it will come and it will shake us up. And we do take punches, and it is hard.
Yeah, and the assumption is the torrent's gonna come, right? The
Mhm.
flood's gonna happen. And when it does, you better have something firmly dug in there. Otherwise, you're kind of at the mercy of it. You're kind of gonna be washed wherever it goes. Now I think as we get into chapter 7, you're gonna see some people who in different ways are kind of finding the truth of building their house on Jesus. And the first is the centurion. And as you get into chapter 7, you have this Roman army official. He might have been in charge of Jewish soldiers instead of not necessarily a detachment of Romans, but in any case, a Roman centurion in Capernaum who he has a servant who's sick and about to die. Says his master valued him highly. I don't know what that, it's hard to know exactly. Does he think of this servant as more an economic advantage, or he really cares about him? I think he really cares about him, it seems like. He heard of Jesus, and he sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him, "This man deserves to have you do this, because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue." So kind of a remarkable guy, right? He's a Gentile. He's a Roman army officer who's also funded a synagogue. I mean, that's pretty, or in some ways helped with the building of the synagogue. So Jesus went with him. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to him, "Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof." So it's interesting. He sends people out to bring Jesus, and then as Jesus gets close, he says, don't trouble yourself. I don't deserve this. That's why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you, but say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it. And when Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him, and turning to the crowd following him, he said, I tell you, I have not found such great faith, even in Israel. Then the man who had been sent returned to the house and found the servant well. This guy, maybe he doesn't necessarily have the theology down, or maybe he does, but for him it's a very experiential thing, right? I know what authority is, and I know that when somebody who has authority says this should be done, it gets done. And so I know that all you have to do is say the word, and my servant will be healed. This again, following Luke's emphasis on healing, and Jesus is amazed by it. Says, I haven't found such faith even among the people who should have it. One of the things I like about this is it I think it's a great story for those of us who have never seen Jesus, right? He's never been physically near us. And so maybe this is a story to hold on to, about a guy who said, I don't need to see. I can believe in you. I can believe in you even when I don't think you're close, when I don't feel you close. I can believe in your authority. I can believe in your power. And in doing so, Jesus is just amazed by him. Usually other people in Luke are amazed by Jesus. This is the first time, and maybe the only time, where we have Jesus amazed by somebody else.
I thought where you were going to go with this was that what the man spoke illustrated the state of his heart. What he did, building the synagogue, being a friend to the Jews, was the fruit that he was bearing. And so Jesus goes. I mean, it does seem to really fit within the pattern of that prior teaching.
Yep.
Right.
I think one of the reasons Jesus was so amazed with him in his verse 7. That is why I did not even consider myself worthy. He's very humble. And that's why he got his request answered. Most people are not that humble.
And just the faith of, I know what authority is, and I know you have it. And all you gotta do is say the word. That's fine. Just say the word.
Well, and two, I'm doing this kingdom study, and in it, it talks about insiders and outsiders, and kind of what we're saying, everything is flipped on its head. I know Steve likes to talk about that everything's upside down. And here, this centurion has greater faith than maybe those who we would expect to have faith, that Jesus is willing to go and be with him because he is an outsider. But yet his faith demonstrates that he's willing to, Lord, I want to follow you. I want to listen. I know who you are. And his words show that. But I love that Jesus listens to the outsiders. He has a heart for all people.
We'll see that again if we get there tonight.
Throughout all, yeah.
If not next week, we'll see it. But yeah, good point.
Rahab in the Old Testament, and I believe that she's probably the only woman that's mentioned 3 times in the New Testament. Sarah is probably mentioned, just as much, or maybe 4 times. I'm not sure. But if we study Joshua, we go back and we read the episode with Joshua, that Rahab, she has no contact with God's people, period. All she hears is through the grapevine that, Egypt was destroyed. Okay, Pharaoh's army was destroyed. And these people, the Hebrews have destroyed these cities, and they're coming here. They're coming here. And Rahab just like, okay, I want to be on the winning team. I'll hide the spies, and so she gets down, and she's like, you can see why she's the great woman of faith. And she's in Hebrews 11, the hall of faith, not fame, but the hall of faith. Okay. All those are examples about people who put extraordinary faith in God and accomplished something that was just unheard of. People who demonstrated faith. So men and, women are included in that. Some people have charged the Hebrew writer to be unfair and not include women, but no, it's clear in Hebrews 11 that, women are involved in the hall of faith as well. But Rahab is a very excellent counterpart to the centurion here.
So then verse 11, soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went along with him. He approached the town gate. A dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the town was with her. When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her. He said, "Don't cry." Then he went up and touched the bier they were carrying him on, and the bearer stood still. He said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." The dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. They were all filled with awe and praised God. The great prophet has appeared among us. They said, God has come to help his people. This news about Jesus spread throughout Judea and the surrounding country. Interestingly, with this woman, there's no evidence of her faith. I mean, there's no evidence she doesn't have faith, but we don't have her faith emphasized at all. It's just Jesus sees this hurting, grieving person. I'm thinking back to what he says in chapter 6, earlier in chapter 6, blessed are you who weep now, for you'll laugh, you'll have joy, you'll rejoice, you'll celebrate. And it's sort of modeling that, right? It's modeling this blessing of God's kingdom, that it's for those who are grieving, it's for those who are forgotten, those who are poor. She would have been poor. She's a widow with with now her only son dead, and in her world, there's not a lot of options, and so she's in dire straits, and she's a lot of those things that Jesus talks about in earlier in chapter 6, where their blessings are needed and are given in God's kingdom to these folks. It's for exactly these people, and it's shown in this action. And the people filled with awe, a great prophet has appeared among us. God has come to help his people. This is what they take it as, right? They see this happen, this resurrection from the dead, and what they get from that, what they understand from that is the right, it's the right message. God has come to help his people. This is Jesus. This is the work of Jesus in a nutshell. It is through Jesus that God has come to help his people in their hour of most need.
Jesus speaks to raise the dead. The prophet Elijah has to cover somebody. Peter has to pray. Paul has to cover the man. So all Jesus does is speak, and
Get up.
he comes back to life.
I like the one too that Jairus' daughter, little girl, get up. I've always liked that.
Yeah, but maybe this is here to counterbalance the centurion. I mean, we just talked about how the centurion had illustrated faith, and so you might be tempted to suggest that Jesus does stuff only for people who deserve it. But wouldn't that be a terrible God to because how many of us really deserve it? So here's a widow in that society, very tenuous position. A son has died, maybe making it even worse. He has compassion. The NIT Bible notes Luke rarely talks about Jesus having compassion. The other gospel writers do. This is unusual. And that's enough, right? So you don't have to worry about asking God for things or seeking because I don't deserve it, because our God has compassion on everyone. If we had to deserve it,
Of
if we
course,
had
the
to deserve
centurion
it,
knew
what
he
would-
didn't deserve it too, right? So,
right? Yeah, I mean, and that answers, of course, like the thief on the cross too, and the like. He had a right attitude. Did he deserve it? Well, our God isn't all that focused necessarily on that. Actually, I was thinking with the rock thing, some people would say, well, it's too late. And I would suggest that if you get into a storm, start digging, right? Because it's not too late. Our God is a God of second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth chances to turn to him.
The note about God looking favorably on his people, you may remember it several times in chapter 1 and again in chapter 2, the different songs that are recorded there talk about God's favor, God showing favor. And so this is very much in line with this theme of God showing favor to his people. The interesting thing is that right after this, you have John the Baptist sending some disciples to Jesus and asking him, are you the one who's to come, or should we expect someone else? At that very time, Jesus cured many who had diseases, sicknesses, and evil spirits, and gave sight to many who were blind. So he replied to the messengers, go back and report to John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me. Why do you think John might have been having problems, having questions? Maybe that's what it is.
We obviously had some doubts while in prison.
Okay,
So Jesus clears up those doubts real quick. we're in prison, we might have some doubts too, it's gotta be
Is
very
he in
impressive.
prison? Is he in prison?
Yeah.
Yeah, chapter 3, verse 20, there's just a reference to Herod locking him up in prison.
That's very depressing.
It's just a passing reference in Luke, but he is.
I think we can all see how doubts will kind of
Yeah.
fit, you know, in a prison situation.
It's kind of a stupid question.
Why you say that?
He's not the one, what are you asking him for?
Well, I think the question he has is, you know, are you just another, are you maybe another person who's pointing us to the next guy? Are you, you know, I think he understands that Jesus is part of this. I mean, he knows from his experience that Jesus is the one he was supposed to be pointing toward. But I think he's just maybe gotten a little, he's just wondering, you know, I mean, he's having some of the questions probably most of us would have. What, you know, maybe what's really, what he's really questioning is, well, why haven't you helped me out? You know, maybe that's part of it, you know, that perhaps there's.
Maybe John was thinking Jesus will do things fast and release him or free him from prison. Maybe he's thinking about that, but things like that is not happening. Maybe that's the reason why he sent the message. I don't know. That is my thought anyway. And two, please to send it back again. I have a two quick question. If you can address that. The army commander was addressing someone who is that is my servant. That servant, the bond servant there, is it a slave? And second, Jesus went there simple because the apostle was telling him he's a good man, he's built a synagogue for us. Is it the reason why Jesus went there? Or the message, the boldness that the man has, the faith that he has, and the message that he sent to Jesus? Which one is how Jesus counted on and went to the man?
Maybe both. I'm not sure. It seems like the fact that it seems like certainly the Jewish leaders that go to Jesus to begin with feel like that Jesus ought to listen to the request because of what this man's done for the nation. Why Jesus responds like he does is maybe an open question. Maybe it's part of that, but I think I tend to think a lot of it has to do with the faith, as we've seen, you know, several times. The centurion himself knows I don't deserve it, and maybe that's in counterpoint to the Jewish leaders saying he deserves it. You know, you're supposed to do this, and he says I don't deserve it. That's not why I'm asking. That's not what I'm doing. And Jesus responds out of his faith. But yeah, I think John is just struggling a little bit with.
He doesn't know what he believes is the right thing, but it's like what Jesus tells him is not going to be able to resolve it. That's why it's kind of a tough question, and it's why Jesus doesn't answer it
Except,
directly.
yeah,
He says, in effect, he says, what I tell you doesn't matter. It's whether there's evidence to back up my claim that I am what I say I am. And
Well,
that's what he needs to do. He
But
says,
that's all consistent with his teaching that he just did. I think it's a sweet story. I mean, John is the cousin of Jesus, right? If anything, he would have known. He's been pointing the way. He baptized Jesus. And it's so human, right? He's in a bad place and he starts. Does he have doubts? Well, he has doubts. He's human enough that he wants to be reassured.
Yeah.
And you know, and I think instead, to Matt's point, instead of saying yes, what does he do? He does exactly what he just said. He points to the fruit, right? He points to the evidence for him to reassure him. But I think what's really sweet is then afterwards, many people would say, well, you doubted, well, some people have stronger faith and some people have weaker. That's not what Jesus did at all. This person who just expressed some doubt or it said, I need reassurance, Jesus says, there has been no one greater than him. And I think we can get a lot of comfort from this story. when we're honest with ourselves and we find we need reassurance and we feel like somehow to confess that is somehow showing we're not worthy, which we're not, of course, but you get what I'm saying. How Jesus handled this is, I think, just lovely.
I like.
He didn't say, you mean your mom didn't tell you about the visit she had with my mom?
I love in verse 22, the line, blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me. I kind of read that as, I know this is hard, John. I know this is, I know this is asking a lot, but just hang in there and don't stumble on account of me. There's a lot about Jesus that could make somebody stumble. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to reorient your life to obey this guy who, clearly he's somebody special. Clearly there's something happening here, but it's not what you thought it was going to be. It's not what anybody was expecting, apparently. And so I think he's sort of extending John a little lifeline here, saying, just hang in there. There's blessings if you'll just trust, if you'll just not trip over this. And I don't think he's at all being critical of John. You're absolutely right. And in fact, he has glowing remarks about John. John's not a guy who, lives in the palace and says soothing words to the king. John is the prophet in the desert screaming, repent at the top of his lungs over and over again, and saying the hard things and getting thrown in prison for it. And there's no one greater than John among those born of women. Yet the one who's least in the kingdom is greater than he. And that's not a slight against John. That's saying this thing that's coming, this new era that's arriving through Jesus is so different from what came before. Upside down, things are turned upside down, things are changed. There's blessings in this kingdom, and God is showing favor to his people, and the least of those living in that is better off than John. Verse 31, then to what then can I compare the people of this generation? What are they like? They're like children sitting in the marketplace and calling out to each other. We played the pipe for you and you did not dance. We sang a dirge and you did not cry. For John the Baptist came neither eating bread nor drinking wine, and you say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and you say, here's a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is proved right by all her children. The picture is of Jesus's critics are spoiled children who, they always want what's not there. They're always wanting people to play, to dance to their tune and to play their games. And both John the Baptist and Jesus disrupted that. And they came not playing the games and not dancing to their tunes. And they came in different ways. And they didn't like either one of them, right? They couldn't be happy with John, who was too critical of them and too judgmental of them. And they couldn't be happy with Jesus, who seemed to embrace sinners and drank wine and ate with the bad people, and they're shocked by it.
There's no excuse for not surrendering to Christ. In other words, believing the gospel message. What I'm trying to say is that here you have two methods, two different types of personality, two types of different ministries. And what's your excuse? Okay, we gave you somebody really serious, ascetic, and then we have somebody a little more joyous, celebrative. And, as you say, I agree with you. They're not happy about either one.
Mhm.
And I years ago, I was working through with a couple guys about baptism. You know, we were going some verses on baptism, and I pointed out that, you know, here that the people who were baptized by John acknowledged, okay, they agreed with, you know, with God's purposes, but the Pharisees and the lawyers who rejected John's baptism, it doesn't say here that they were following John. The people followed John. I said, these people, you know, it makes it very clear that they were baptized by John. Okay, so I want to say is that there's something, you know, there's something to, i.e. baptism, than just the dip in the water. Okay, that John's baptism wasn't just, even though it was by water, that it wasn't just something useless or just something for show or something like that. There was something to it, and this paragraph is bringing that out, that, you know, there's something more to John's baptism than just that. Yes, it was for forgiveness of sins, and yes, he baptized with water, but there's something more, a little more going on with it.
Yeah, those who responded to John, you know, did so because they were in line with God's will. They were wanting to do what God was. They wanted to be a part of what God was doing, and wanting that in their lives, and wanting to respond to that. And yeah, what's inside you comes out, right? What's inside you comes out in the way you respond and the way you behave. Well, we need to wind things up, so thank you for your comments. We'll pick up in verse 36 with the sinful woman, sinful in quotation marks. I guess actually Luke says sinful.
Oh, foot washing.
Yeah, foot washing next Wednesday. Bring your basins and clean socks. I don't know. All right.